experiment. The Constitution is a fulfillment of that promise. What is the philosophy of government? We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that they're endowed by, they're created with certain unalienable rights. That's our philosophy of government. What is the purpose of government? It's in the very next sentence. Robbie nailed it. Right? To secure, the very next sentence. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. That's it. That's it. It didn't talk about governments are instituted among men in order to make sure that people have food on the table. That's not government's job to make sure that people have food on the table. It's not their job to make sure they have health care. It's not their job to make sure that they have housing. That is not the government's job. Right? This is found neither in the Declaration nor the Constitution. Right? So you've got the philosophy of government is we inherently, just by virtue of our humanity, we are free. The purpose of government, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, and then following the idea of popular sovereignty, which is deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. Guys, we're the bosses. And I think this is so important that when we're involved in a forum where we have candidates, that these guys are coming in for an interview. They're coming in for a job interview. And we have an obligation to ask tough questions. So I remember years ago, some of the techniques that I'm talking about. There's an individual running. He was running for the Senate, and came in, and they fired away. And the question was asked, listen, your enumerated powers, which we're going to go through in just a second. You have 18 enumerated powers outlined in Article 1, Section 8. Why is that important? Well, those enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8 are the only things that Congress can do. Guys, this is super important. Understand that when we talk about authority given to the government, it's not one of negative powers. Negative powers means I can do whatever I want so long as it says I can't. That's not what this is. It's a document of positive powers, meaning this. You can only do it if it says you can. You can only do it if it says you can. So when you talk about Article 1, Section 8, that's one that we talk about quite often when it comes to the legislative branch, because is that you can take a look at it. 18 enumerated powers. That's all they're permitted to do. And so when I have someone talking about whatever it is, Social Security, education, immigration, pushing the issue to make sure they understand you're operating within one of those 18 enumerated powers. That's really, really important. So I remember someone had asked a question, would you be so kind as to name 3 of the 18? And his response was, what is this, an interview? And they're like, yeah, as a matter of fact it is. He says, I'm not answering these questions. You want to talk about the enumerated powers afterwards, I'll meet you afterwards, but that's not what we're here to discuss. This guy coming in for a job interview, telling the bosses what the questions are going to be. Now, this is just, where does that come from? Where does that whole idea come from? It comes from this idea that we as a citizenry are treating 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate as our bosses. And we're behaving like that to a large degree, aren't we? Like, how do 535 individuals tell 330 million people what to do? It can only happen under one condition. We believe they're the bosses. And that's what's going on. So it's important. So one of the questions that you'll see here, okay, can I, actually I want to grab my, is that my copy? Yeah, I have a special copy. Let me see if I got the one with all the answers in the back. No, I have a, I marked some things up on questions I want to go over.
Shane, who coined the phrase American exceptionalism? So what philosophy did this individual say that?
We're not going back to that, Robbie.
Just thought
We're talking about purpose of government now.
Sorry.
There you go, Robbie. Going all over again.
I'll sit it before.
Hey, you go there, we'll talk afterwards. So listen, I had one, where'd you put it? Did you give me one?
No, you went over.
I went over and I didn't slide my fingers.
Yeah.
So look. So what you're going to see here is something that I put together quite some time ago, just giving you some ideas. This is not an exhaustive list of questions. These are just examples of questions that can be asked. So look at You see where it says general principles of the Constitution and freedom? You see that?
Can we read now?
Yes, you can read. Permission granted from the boss to the servants. Yeah. Right, so you see that where it says general principles of the Constitution and freedom?
Yes.
So what is the purpose of government? I think it's a powerful question. It's a powerful question, and many candidates might be able to nail that one down. But I think it's foundational. Does it necessarily need to be asked? Well, it depends. Right? It depends. It's sizing up the individual who's coming in to speak. But then I talk about what is the purpose of the Constitution. I think it's important for candidates to be able to articulate what its purpose is. What is its purpose? Without reading it.
To constrain the government.
It's to restrain the government. The Constitution is not put together to restrain the people. The idea is for people to be free and for government to maximize freedom. That as individuals go about behaving as free people, their job is to make sure that our freedom is not being used in such a way that we would violate the life, liberty, property of someone else. Right? I look at my job as a prosecutor. When did I get involved as a general proposition? When individuals use their liberty to violate the life, liberty, or property of someone else. They stole someone else's property. They killed somebody. They harmed them in some way, shape, or form. So the old adage is, my freedom to swing my fist ends where your chin begins. It's kind of the idea. And until that happens, the Constitution says stay out of our business. But what have we done? What have we done? The government's involved in nearly every area of our life today. Nearly every area of our life. So that's a powerful, powerful question. So let's go. I wanted to just point out a few of these here. Let's go on to. Yeah, let's go to legislative branch. Because most of the individuals that are coming in here, you've got individuals running for governor, so some are running for the executive branch, but most are coming in that they're looking to be lawmakers. And so much of this revolves around this. Now let me just talk about something real quick. When someone's coming in and running for state office, Article 1, Section 8 doesn't necessarily apply to them. Right? Because you're talking about U.S. Congress. Okay? But why do you think it's important that someone running for the state legislature or running for the governorship understand Article 1, Section 8? To know when the rules are not being followed. Nicole, were you going to add to that?
Because the Arizona Constitution reflects the United States Constitution. So the Arizona Constitution is above the U.S. Constitution. So anything not covered in the Arizona Constitution falls under the federal Constitution.
Okay. So let's talk about it. Let's say that we have someone coming in here. We've had several individuals come in here who are running for governor. Do you think it's important that the governor understand Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution? Okay, so let's step back for a moment. Article 1 of the Constitution pertains to the legislative branch. Article 2 pertains to the executive branch. Article 3 pertains to the judicial branch. Like having a good working knowledge of those three branches of government is really important. Now, if I have a governor that doesn't understand Article 1, Section 8, I don't know how we can really believe in our day and age that we're really going to get back to where we need to be. Now, I look at, can you think of a governor right now in the United States that probably has a decent working knowledge of this?
Yes, Governor Florida.
Yes. That was the one that came to mind, DeSantis. Why do you say that?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, whoever said he's the governor of Florida. Why do you say that?
Because he's standing up to the federal government. And
Okay.
he knows what he's standing on.
Yes.
The laws.
Okay. So here's why it's important that you have a governor, DeSantis, or any governor that we're going to elect, understands Article 1, Section 8. They have to understand the grants of authority given to the legislative branch. When you look at the executive branch, Article 2 gives the president 6 enumerated powers. That's it. And then the judicial branch talks about the types of cases that they're permitted to hear. Now, here's why this is important. If the legislature drafts a law that's signed by the president and is being imposed on the citizenry of Arizona, what can a governor do who understands the Constitution? What can he do?
Make that,
He can, I heard nullify. Nullify. Linda, were you going to say that as well? Guys, this is a principle we're not talking about. Listen, did the federal government create the states or the other way around?
The other way around.
The other way around.
The state created them.
The federal government does not have anything that the states did not have in the first place themselves. Taking it one step further, the government cannot possess anything that the people didn't possess in the first place themselves. The government can't do anything that we as a people couldn't do individually, first and foremost. You can't, in this sort of government, and the way that it was established, right, by the consent of the government, we can only give something that we had in the first place. And so, nullification is a powerful, powerful idea that has been used by very few over the last 100 years, which is basically this. You pass this law, vaccine mandates, mask mandates. What should have happened, it doesn't matter if you agree with vaccine mandates or masks, I don't really care whether you agree with them or not. I'm talking about what states are permitted to do. Does the federal government have the authority to legislate with regard to vaccine mandates?
no.
And if someone tells you that they do, we should invite them to tell us where in Article 1, Section 8, they have the authority to legislate in that regard. Mask mandates. Does the federal government have the authority to do that?
No.
No. And you had one governor who basically said, we are not participating. We're not participating.
Virginia governor too.
Yeah, so you had a few that at least alluded to, we're not participating. You do not have the authority to do what you do. Now, can you imagine if you had candidates running for governor that we asked them this question, and they could talk about the principles of nullification, but they could talk about it through the lens of the Constitution itself, saying, listen, yes, if I'm in a position where the federal government's attempting to impose certain action on the states, if it does not comply with the provisions of the Constitution and they do not have the authority, I will nullify. I will nullify. Now, what does that mean will happen? It's going to be a battle. There's probably going to be a lawsuit. But there are cases, well, you all remember the Prince case. The Prince case happened, Richard Mack was one of the sheriffs involved with that. But essentially it was the federal government said this: you have to run background checks. You have to run background checks. And the county that Sheriff Mack was in, he said, we are not going to run background checks. You're asking us to provide all of the resources. We will not comply. We're not doing it. So what happened? The federal government says, we're not playing this game either. So a lawsuit was filed, and it went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and what did the U.S. Supreme Court say? In that case, they said the federal government does not have the authority to tell the states and the counties what to do. Right? So we've got a court at least interpreting the Constitution in this regard in the right way. Can you imagine how powerful this is to ask? And I think, Greg, didn't you ask one of the candidates who came in about nullification? Do you remember in what context that was?
Yeah, I don't care what law he's been passed. I simply asked him what he would do to keep the federal government out of our state under justice.
Yeah.
And he didn't know. So afterwards we talked to him. And I asked him if he could nullify it. And he and his wife asked me afterwards, could I explain what that is?
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, well, at least he was willing to learn. Right? So follow me on some of these, and these are all written down in here. So in Article 1, Section 9, there are some prohibitions, things that Congress is not allowed to do. So Article 1, Section 8, these are what things you're permitted to do. In Article 1, Section 9 are things, there's a few provisions that say you're not allowed to do these things. So a question that I might ask as an example. As a member of Congress, there are a few things that you are not permitted to do under Article 1, Section 9. One of those things is the Bill of Attainder. Would you be so kind as to explain to us what a Bill of Attainder is? Guys, if it wasn't important, the founders would have never put it in there. I think it's important. If you're going to send individuals to D.C. who are going to take an oath, they should know what the prohibition is. What's a Bill of Attainder? Ask them what the Bill of Attainder is. Basically, just so you know, a Bill of Attainder is essentially punishing a group of people without giving them the benefit of trial. For example, hey, if you're a communist, you can't run for office. That's essentially a bill of attainder, where you're just doing broad, sweeping action without going through the legislative process. You're just making a declaration, if you will. That's a bill of attainder. I think it's pretty important, because do we see that happening right now? Like, guys, there's a movement. In fact, we've got a big debate coming up. A big debate on May 4th. That's going to happen right here. You all know Zudy Jazzer? Carl Goldberg? Yeah, that's about to happen here. So Zudy Jazzer, he's all over Fox News. He's here locally. He's a medical doctor. And Carl Goldberg he's an individual on the other side of the debate. Zudy is a Muslim. And Carl Goldberg takes the position that 9/11 and the extremists there were simply living out the doctrine. They were living out the religion in its purest sense. And Zudy says a bunch of nonsense. So we're going to talk, it's going to be a full-on debate. I've actually moderated their debates twice. Once on my radio show and another once live. You're going to bring the popcorn. I'm just telling you, bring the popcorn. Bring the popcorn, it's going to be good. But anyways, you have individuals, I've been involved in debates where individuals said, listen, Islam, that should not be a protected religion. If the legislature were to come out and say, you know what, if you're Muslim, you can't do A, B, and C. You can make an argument that that's a bill of attainder. I want to know that individuals that we're electing know what a bill of attainder is. What's another example?
Corruption of blood.
Yeah. So you've got those provisions, corruption of blood. You've got issues of, you've got ex post facto laws. You have prohibition against habeas corpus, which is an important one. Anybody know what the prohibition against habeas corpus is?
Where's the body?
Where's the body? Meaning, if an individual is going to be accused of something, bring forth the body. Meaning, present him in court. What's happening as a result of January 6th? As a result of January 6th, individuals are being held. They're being held without trial. Wouldn't that be a fascinating question? Listen, there are some things that happened on January 6th. Would you please talk about your position with regard to January 6th, individuals being held and there being no trial that's anywhere in the near future? Would you talk about that from the lens of the prohibition outlined in Article 1, Section 9, talking about habeas corpus? Because these guys are just going there and they're just, everybody else is on board with this. Listen, most of what we're talking about, 95% of those in Washington, D.C. would have no clue what we're talking about here tonight. So I was invited back in 2012 to speak to all of the incoming freshmen, congressmen, all the new guys. It was crazy.
I'd love to be a fly on that one.
Well, you would have loved it, shoulder to shoulder, bro. It was amazing. I'm thinking, you have all of these guys. I'm in a room with all these congressmen out in Washington, D.C. They're all brand new, green as can be, wet behind the ears. And we start to talk about these things. And these guys have no idea what I'm talking about.
And that wasn't televised across the entire union?
They had no idea what I was talking about. None. Why? Because these sorts of things aren't being done. We're asking them about their kids, and we're asking them about their job, and we're asking them about, now, what are you going to do? And I'm going to stand strong. And that's what we got. There's a bunch of people out there in D.C. that have no clue. I mean, I can almost guarantee you that if we were to put this question out on habeas corpus, that 95% of the 535 representatives couldn't tell you what we're talking about when we talk about the prohibition against habeas corpus. Couldn't tell you. But we got a bunch of individuals being held. I don't care if you like them, the individuals that did what they did. I don't care if you like them or not. If it's a Republican form of government, it doesn't matter. You protect even the minority. Why are we having it? And I know, what are the congressmen doing? Or individuals in D.C.? They're hanging on to certain legislation. Saying, well, hey, listen, given this situation, this is how we're going to treat these guys. There's been legislation passed. Listen, any piece of legislation that's in direct violation of the Constitution itself is no legislation at all. It's no law at all. It's null and void. And so asking these people these questions are super important. So I hope you're kind of getting my grip here. Article 1, Section 8, enumerated powers. Article 1, Section 9, talking about the prohibition. Robbie asked a great question to the last individual that was here who was running for governor. Do you remember the question he asked about the state militia? Yeah. And Listen, the answer that was given about going down the borders, he said, I would bring in the National Guard. And Robbie said, I'm asking you to bring in the militia. And he says, I'm bringing in the National Guard. He says, that's not the militia. And he pointed to Article 1, Section 15, that basically says the states have the authority to do the organizing. Right? It's not just calling people in. You're like the commander-in-chief of the state of Arizona. You're just going to call them in and say, no, what are we going to do here? Right? That was a powerful question. Now, let's hit on another one here real quick. Article 2 speaks to what branch of government? President, the executive branch. How many grants of authority does he have? Six. He's got 6. So anytime the executive is doing something, your question should always be first and foremost, where does he have the authority to do it? Guys, don't get caught in this debate of discussing good ideas versus bad ideas. It shouldn't matter whether or not a piece of legislation is a good idea or a bad idea till we first establish whether it's constitutional or not.
Amen.
Right? There's lots of good ideas out there. But if they don't have the authority to actually enact such a law, it doesn't matter. It's game over. We have to look elsewhere. So executive orders. Executive orders. Are executive orders constitutional?
Yes and no.
Oh, that was a trick question.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. When is an executive order? So first of all, an executive order is just that. It's an order given by the president. It's an order given by the executive branch. What kind of executive orders are constitutional?
One is for the executive branch.
What's that?
One's written specifically for the executive branch.
Okay, give an example.
I don't have one.
Okay?
Because I don't think they do that anymore.
Okay?
Well,
Yeah, Rob.
executive order is only constitutional if it supports a constitutional law that the legislature has enacted. So if the legislature passes a law that is unconstitutional, then you cannot make an executive order to execute that law. So an executive order is created by the president to fulfill a law with respect to the executive departments.
Yes.
But that does not mean that you can make an executive order outside of legislation.
Yes. Very well said. So Robin, let me ask you. Who has the power to declare war?
Congress.
Congress. Does the president have the power to declare war?
Negative.
None. None. Has anybody heard anything? I don't watch Fox News. Maybe you guys can tell me. People always like, Shane, you watch the news? Haven't watched the news in almost 10 years. Haven't watched Fox News in a decade. Haven't watched CNN, MSNBC. My boy Glenn Beck, I haven't watched it in almost 10 years. People say, Shane, what are you going to do if something happens? I'm like, somebody will tell me. Somebody will tell me. But have you heard anything about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, about the legislative branch taking action?
I just read something.
What did they say?
They said that Congress let the president know that they can't declare war without the Congress's approval.
So it sounds like you had a few people with a loud voice then, because that wasn't Congress yelling in unison, I'm sure. That was probably a Ted Cruz or a Mike Lee or something like that. But the principle is right. In order to engage, you've got to have legislative branch saying you have permission to do that, and then the executive stepping in. So, anyways, Robbie did a great job on the executive branch or executive order. So, if I have the authority, if I'm the president, an executive order that would be constitutional is carrying out something that I'm permitted to do. So, war has been declared, and now I'm going to make some strategic decisions. I'm going to make some orders along the way on how we're going to execute this war. So, I would issue some executive orders along the way. The way I run my administration within the executive branch, I can issue orders to determine how those things are going to be run because that's my responsibility. When is an executive order unconstitutional?
It has no legislative
Yeah, when it's bypassing the legislative process. When he's simply saying, you know what, we really want to work with you, but if you're not going to work with us, ladies and gentlemen of Congress, I've got a pen and a phone. You remember that, right? Yeah. That's the whole idea of an executive order. I will sign, we'll just make it a law, and I will bypass. So watch this. There's executive orders that happen all the time. Every administration, Trump signed them, Biden signing them, Obama signed them, they all signed them. Why are we not asking questions about how individuals in the legislative branch that want our vote are going to deal with executive orders? Why are we asking that question?
How do they deal with those orders?
Wait, what did you say, Robbie?
That's because we're too busy asking them how you're gonna beat the Democrats.
Yeah,
That's why.
yeah.
How do they beat those executive orders?
Let's talk briefly about it. What can be done if I'm running for the legislative branch? What can be done? So let me stop right there.
You can introduce a bill that
Okay.
that actually nullifies it.
Okay, so let's talk about
It would
it.
be nullified because it isn't even real, but I mean,
If I were asking the question, so let's step back to kind of the big reason why we're here talking. If I were to ask the question, it would go something like this. You're running you're asking our vote, asking for our vote as you attempt to move into DC as a member of Congress. I'm really concerned about many of the executive orders that are going on in Washington, D.C. Can you tell me how you will deal with those executive orders using the Constitution as your guide? So what am I doing? I'm forcing, number one, I just established the playing field, the Constitution. And number two, I'm asking him if he knows of the solution. What is the solution? Now, on passing a law, what is the problem with the legislative branch saying, well, I'm just going to pass a law? Who has to sign it? The very guy who's signing the executive order. Is he going to sign off on it? Probably not. But is there, we could test the candidate's knowledge on this. Is there a way to bypass a presidential veto?
yeah.
2/3. Why aren't we testing the knowledge? Does he know that? Does he know that with an executive order, that's one of the routes that we can go, is that if we pass a law and he vetoes it, I got to rally 2/3. Now, is that going to happen today, given the dynamic? Probably not. But I want to know he's got a working knowledge. What else can be done? Yeah, Robbie.
Impeachment of high treason.
Yeah.
He's imposing the system of monarchism into a Republican form of government. That's contrary to the entire federal constitution. You can impeach the man for high treason.
Why hasn't
So impeachment is another option. Yeah, well, my point is there's all kinds of tools that he has available to himself. Why aren't we testing him as to his knowledge as to the availability of those tools? A lawsuit? A lawsuit could come about. Who's going to file a lawsuit? Well, there's some strategy involved here. So let's say that the president writes off on an executive order that mandates Arizona, all the states, to do certain things with regard to guns. Like, hey, if you own a firearm, it's got to be locked up. You can't carry this. And that's an executive order. How would you go about filing a lawsuit? You would have, in the legal arena, in order to file a lawsuit, you have to have what they call standing. You have to have a legal injury. Let me give you an example, kind of on a smaller scale. You live in Glendale, and the city of Mesa school board says, we're now going to pray in schools. Hypothetically. It doesn't matter if you believe in that or not, but let's just assume that. And in Glendale, you don't like that idea. You live in Glendale, could you file a lawsuit to stop that? No.
You have no jurisdiction.
But you've experienced no legal injury. But what if you had a kid going to that school? Now you have legal injury. Now you can file a lawsuit. There are all kinds of law firms all over the country that will use their resources to find individuals that have standing to counter executive orders.
No, they won't.
Yes, they will.
We have.
Yeah, and we've got a couple of attorneys that are going to come in and speak that have done it.
Well, we hard
Well,
pressed.
you can't get all crazy. You might have had one example
No.
with you and they wouldn't do it, but there are firms that do it. Goldwater Institute's a great example.
But you know how backed up they are?
Yeah, but my point is, that is possible, right? So that's the whole idea of countering executive order. My hope is that you really see kind of the big idea of what's going on. And as you go through this, just ask, find out if you're going to ask a question, you just get one shot. What's that question for you? And I would just encourage you that when you do ask the question, always ask the framework through the lens of freedom, with the Constitution in mind. You get to establish the playing field for how he'll answer the question. And It's going to make some people uncomfortable that come here. There might be some that are saying, I hear what you're doing. Like, this video might go out. In fact, is there a live feed going on right now, George?
Yeah.
George, or a
No.
live feed?
No.
Yeah.
No, yes.
Yes. I still there might be some watching this like, oh man, and they might get a hold. I don't care. Give them it. You know candidates, give them it. Right? We want people that are knowledgeable. This isn't a gotcha game, trying to get them where they don't know, and man, I got you. No, we want them to understand these things. Any questions? We're just about through for the night. Any questions on any of this? Linda?
I want to know if the truckers who are going to Washington would be better off to go to their state capitals first, get the governor to do his job, and then go to Washington.
So Linda, that's a great question. The question was, these truckers that are doing their thing, better to go to their state capitals, get the governors on board, or better to go to DC? Listen, I'm a big believer in a multifaceted attack. Multi-directional. You know, that's one big problem that we have in the liberty movement, and I've dealt with it for almost 25 years. I'm big on education. I know that's what I've been called to do. That's what I'm supposed to do with my life, is educate on the principles of freedom. Educate on Constitution. Rally the troops in that process. Yet you'll have nullification, for example. There are groups out there that all they do is nullification. That's their own entire focus. And so I'll have a conversation, Shane. If you're not almost entirely preaching the one solution of nullification, man, you just don't get it. And then someone over here saying, Shane, election integrity, bro. Like if that's not all you're preaching, you don't get it. Shane, haven't you seen what's going on down at the border? Like if you're not all in and that's all you're preaching is fix the immigration problem, man, you don't get it. Like, man, if you're not all on board with Trump, man, like we got to get him back in office, like, you don't get it. There's all of these sorts of things going on, and I disagree with all of those things because we're freedom fighters. We're the hands and feet of the freedom movement. And the idea is to bring individuals that have different talents and abilities, and we bring those things to the table and we march as an army forward. And as we do those things, there is a multifaceted attack. We're hitting people. Yeah, we're using nullification. We're using lawsuits. Right? We're getting the right candidates ready to go. We're over here educating the people and teaching them. We're doing all of these things simultaneously. That's the idea. And that's what the other side for the last 100 years has been doing so effectively. They're doing it so well, hitting us from every side, like, we got you there. And you look around and say, oh man, they got a whole army of a bunch of solutions because this one didn't work. They're very, very good at it. And so often we just look at, there's one. So I look at what we're doing here. The whole idea of questioning just one of many solutions. It's not the answer. It's just one of the answers. It's a part of the solution. Linda.
What can we do as Arizona citizens to stop this illegal border crossings?
Well, listen.
Can we march on the Capitol?
Yeah, well, let me ask to your first question.
In months.
Linda, you're so fired up. I feel like you just want to answer your own question because you're so fired up. I know. Listen, on the trucker issue, I didn't really answer that because I think it goes to the part of the second question you're asking. I think we need to do both. We need to do both. Like it's hitting governments at all levels. When you talk,
how to get it to them.
What's that?
That thought came to me too, that truckers need to stop on their way, or a few of them need to go on their way. They need to hit all 50 states, as well as go back to Washington, because they're not going to get nothing in Washington. Washington is lawless.
But why does it have to be the truckers? Why can't we?
Well,
decide?
that's what.
No, you're exactly
Why
right.
can't we?
Well, why is it the Canadians? Like, since when have the Canadians led on the freedom front, baby? They are right now. They are right now, finally. I got a bunch of friends. I was up, they played a joke on me. I went to speak to a bunch of freedom advocates up in Canada. They brought me up in February. Saskatchewan. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. This is no word of a lie. Sent me to Saskatchewan in the middle of February, and it was 40 degrees below zero. I'm like, I love freedom, but I don't know if I love it that much. Right? It was a great time. But I always give them a hard time, like, well, they're like, man, you guys are so patriotic, all about George Washington, your Constitution, and we're just laid back, eh? Just laid back. I'm like, yeah, you guys need to wake up. And now here they are. Now they're saying, where are you guys at? Where are you guys at? It's really kind of awesome, but it's a unique time in history. And Linda, the answer to your question, I think a lot of it has to do with the governor, who understands that he's the commander-in-chief. It's engaging a state militia. It's understanding how to counter many of the proposed things that are going on from the top down, federal government down. Like, it's a multifaceted approach, and we'll talk about that another time. But it's a great question. But I look at, I look at what's going on, and we talk about this multifaceted approach. I just know that if we start to take some of these ideas, I'm excited about the next candidate. Who's coming in? Do we have a candidate coming in?
Tiffany Shed.
Running for Attorney General. Anyways, so listen, as I mentioned before, you can do whatever you want. You can ask whatever questions you want. But I hope you see value here. I hope you see value in asking questions in a particular way and really getting to the bottom of it and forcing the issue. And I believe that as we do that, our best days are yet to come. They're yet to come. And it's because of Freedom Folks coming together. So, guys, it was great being with you tonight. I'll turn it back over to Jeff.
Linda just not honest. She's not going home tonight.
Hey, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Shane, with this next candidate that's coming in, I'm new at this gig here, right? I don't know what to ask. So will you?
It's on the paper.
It's on the paper.
Will you just go off the paper and ask the questions, or can you help feed the audience questions for the candidate?
Yeah, so
We will feed each other.
Huh?
Yeah, we'll feed each other as you hear some of the questions. Bring the pamphlet with you.
It's okay to
Read it
read
this
off the
week.
paper.
There's some great questions in there.
Okay.
Very basic questions. Linda.
I'm afraid of martial law coming in with what's going to happen in Washington. That really scares me.
Yes.
You look up on the internet, the Attorney General's office, the website tells you the purpose of the Attorney General. Then you you open your national constitution, and you look up the Attorney General, and you find out what is the purpose of the Attorney General. Then you can start asking them questions when they get up there. Other than, what are you gonna do to beat the Democrats?
I don't care what they do.
Good advice, Robbie.
I know, I don't either, but that's what we ask people, that's what we Republicans do.
And those that have been here for some of those meetings, they understand that, they've seen that, and I really hope you're able to make it next week.
What's next week?
Yes, Tiffany will be with us next week. Tiffany Shed, she's running for Attorney General, and of all the candidates, you would think that she might know some of these answers pretty well. So she's sharp. So and Nicole, I believe Nicole knows her or knows of her, but. What's that? Okay, great. All right, let's go ahead and close out tonight. So we appreciate you being here. This has been a lot of fun. Shane is over here if you have any more questions for him. He's also got some books, t-shirts, and stuff for sale. There's a cute little girl over there that started a business called Let's Go Bracelets. Kind of goes along with Let's Go Brandon, if you get it. She said she's selling some bracelets over there.
We'd like to thank you for being with us. This is MAAP Real Talk Show with you. We're broadcasting from Gilbert, Arizona with the United Patriot. As you know, AZ. Don't forget .org if you have any information or you need any information, check them out. United Patriots AZ. Thank you so much. This is MAAP Real Talk Show. We don't say goodbye. We always say stay tuned.